SBC Media.
Welcome to the iGaming Daily podcast, analysing the news from the betting and gaming industry all over the globe, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market.
Welcome to the 500th episode of the iGaming Daily podcast. To celebrate this landmark occasion in true iGaming Daily style, there are no gimmicks, quizzes or montages. Instead, it's the first installment of a two-part episode with myself and Antony Gevisser of Supergroup, as we examine the black market and its consequences for the global gambling industry. The decade witnesses a breakneck expansion of iGaming into newly regulated markets across all continents. While incumbents adapt to the terms of newly regulated environments, consumers remain vulnerable during the transition period, exposed to black market threats. A member of the International Masters of Gaming Law, Gevisser currently serves as Vice President of Legal Affairs at Supergroup, the parent company of Betway and Spin. His 30-year legal career spans litigation, alternative dispute resolutions, commercial contracts, and intellectual property within the gambling sector. Antony, welcome to the iGaming Daily podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you very much, Ted, and good to be here.
I'm Ted Menmuir, and before we begin, just a shout out to Optimove, the sponsors of the iGaming Daily, and the #1 CRM solution for the global gambling industry. Anthony, I'm so glad to welcome you on to talk about the black market. And I want to begin by just speaking about your career and what has attracted you to kind of tackle this element and this black element of gaming like head on from your perspective.
Well, look, I've been in this industry. First of all, I'm a qualified lawyer, and that was my starting point. And I got into this online gaming industry approximately 20 years ago. And so I've watched it develop. I've seen it develop from its embryonic stages, where it was really just software being introduced into the market, predominantly into the United States and other parts of the world, all up to today, where there is, as you've mentioned, an increased desire and movements towards regulating. And by virtue of that journey, it's been increasingly obvious that there is a black market component, which is part of the ecosystem, which is essentially operating illegally and failing to protect players and garner fiscal revenue. And that's an increasing problem, which I'm aware of. And so it's really in the interest of this business that I work for, and in my interests, certainly as a lawyer, to try and figure out a way that we can constrict this, because it's becoming much more of a problem.
So let's talk about the black market as an illegal threat, and how does it differ to other illegal kind of activities, and other kind of illegal online activities that we see in the modern world?
Well, look, I'm not that au fait with what all of the other illegal or criminal activities are necessarily going on via the internet. I'm sure they're manifold. But of course, central to that issue of illegality and criminality is money laundering. And very much part of the mantra of regulated gaming, and central to it, is to make sure that funds are clean, that we're not intentionally or unintentionally laundering illicit monies and putting them through a system. And I think that's part of a greater global problem.
So, as you mentioned, as I mentioned in the intro, we're going through a kind of phase of regulatory transition across multiple markets. But from your kind of executive eye, and how is kind of the black market become a key concern for kind of industry governance?
Well, I mean, look, first of all, Ted, the fact is that it is a concern, and it's something which governments, politicians, regulators, and enforcement agencies need to sit up and take more notice of. Not that they haven't, but they need to figure out a way of actually effectively stopping it. So how did this come about? There's a variety of different ways that it was enabled. I think there's a failure of regulators, or the systems that regulators are introducing in itself, which is in fact also assisting and driving the black market. And that's a failure of what I call responsible regulating, and regulators creating issues within their own regimes, which would lead to less competitiveness, less market entry by the right players, and therefore a bigger availability of space for these black marketeers.
Interesting. And look, before we go into kind of the regulatory course of gaming, I want to kind of take you back on what do we know about the black market and how have we got to this place now where all of a sudden it seems to be on everyone's agenda. And we also seem to have like very different actions on how it should be tackled. So how have we got to this place as we are now?
Well, the first, the answer to that, Ted, is we've got there kind of organically over time. I think that a lot of different things created it. I think it was there in the beginning. I think that as certain countries started to regulate, there was always going to be a black market. And then when countries become regulated, if they do it ineffectively, and there are lots of examples of that, then what you're essentially doing is you're not channeling your demographic into a regulated space, and that demographic is going offshore for a variety of different reasons. And finally, what I want to mention is, we're in a world of significant technological advancement, AI, social networking, different channels that the youth are starting to use. And of course, the youth are getting older and they will be the next generation. And that's something that we have to contend with as well.
And I want to pick you up on the transition and where we've seen a lot of markets go from grey to black, right? So it's a very easy narrative to kind of put down, right? But how do you kind of describe that? And in that context, what makes a good operator that should be allowed into the market?
Right. So I think part of this, what we're really looking at is what the difference is between a black and a grey market. And sometimes those get conflated. And I think it's important that they're distinguished. A black market is an illegal criminal market. It's where there is a legitimate, lawful, viable and acceptable regulatory regime in a country in terms of which they offer authorizations or permits or licenses. And it's quite clear that you do not have a defensible position without one of those licenses. You don't apply for one of those licenses. You still target the residents of that country and you start to operate. That's a black market. A grey market is nuanced and there's a lot of shades of grey. And essentially what lies at the base of a grey market is a defensible legal position to be there. And that is very nuanced depending on country to country, but it relies on expert local legal advice that you can offer your products. And an important facet of the grey market is that it's licensed from a responsible regulator somewhere, even if not by a regulator in that country, which may or may not even exist in that country. So you have the likes of the MGA, the Maltese Gaming Authority, which could be your licensor. Now, that's a very well-run regulatory regime with great checks and balances to ensure that the social responsibility of protecting players and funds and operating in an ethical way, in a way that everyone in the industry understands is the right way to behave. So that's essentially the difference between a grey and black market. And sometimes grey markets, depending on who's calling it out, will be called black markets because it suits certain parties. And those are different reasons. But really, there really does need to be a distinction understood, not just by regulators, but by the general public or anyone else who has a vested interest in this industry, that a grey market is not a black market. And we know what a black market is. And this is what we're talking about today. And this is what, I'd like to try and, insofar as I can, restrict, because you're never going to kill a black market. And that's another point I want to make.
So, okay, let's make that distinction. You made that distinction between a grey and black market operator. Now, I think something that's kind of lost is who's running these black market operations.
Okay. That's not easy. Okay. First of all, there seems to be this focus incorrectly on how big is the black market. Everyone needs to know how big it is. If I go to a regulator and I say you've got a problem with the black market, like a German regulator who has indicated that they believe the black market is only 4% of the total market, which everyone knows is a totally incorrect figure. We know it's much, much bigger than that. So first of all, people just need to stop fixating on what is the size of it. We all know it's huge. and we all know that something has to be done about it, and we know what the negative effects on a regulated market is, and we know what the negative effects it is on customers and on keeping money within certain territories from a fiscal perspective. So I want the question to move away from how big is the black market, because you will never find the exact size of a black market. You will never find the empirical evidence as to what it is. It's almost impossible to do. If you try to do market research on customers of a black market, I think we all know where that market research is going. No one wants to volunteer this information, whether they are participating in black markets nefariously or for other reasons. So how big is this black market? We don't know, but we know it's huge. And we know that it's eating away at businesses like ourselves who make a point of operating in a regulated way and legitimately and in the interest of our shareholders and the general public who use our online products. We don't sell flowers. We are gambling products. We understand our social responsibility and we take it very seriously.
But doesn't that liability need kind of a rounded number to say, look, this is the threat? As you see in other issues, be it drug control, alcoholism, you need a blunt number to say, look, governments take attention to it.
Well, I first of all, I'm not sure you need it. But I take your point, Ted, that it would certainly assist. We do know you could look at reports that have been issued recently by the British Gambling Council, the BGC, trying to get the attention of the Gambling Commission. They've come out with some figures and empirical data. The American Gaming Association has come out with numbers. I'm currently involved in a German study where we could get close to that. But again, I appreciate the question. I appreciate that people need this empirical answer. But I think people also need to appreciate why those numbers can't be accurate and that there's sufficient evidence to show that it's large and a problem and it's looming. And the evidence of that as well is in the fact, and I'm pleased for it, that every single day I see another article of another country and a regulator starting to take action, or at least saying that they're starting to take action. And that in itself is evidence that they're taking it seriously, and it is a risk in the ways that I've already set out.
SBC Leaders connects the gambling industry's top-tier operators and associations to share the best ideas, collaborate on solving the biggest issues, and push innovation throughout the betting and gaming industry. If you're an operator and want to join the discussion, visit sbcleaders.com for more information.
So, looking at kind of the regulatory condition, what is the liability of the black market on a country that has regulated laws, whether you like them or not, on online gambling? And where is kind of the active threat to the consumer?
So when you talk about the liability, are you talking about the risk to a country that has a black market operating therein?
Yes. As you said, we've seen kind of grey markets transition to regulated frameworks. So what is the threat of the black market on a regulated framework?
I think we go back to the very purpose of what we believe responsible regulation is. The first is the protection of players, and that is the most important. And the next is the fiscal revenue, which can be applied internally. Now let's look at social responsibility and the potential ills, if it's unchecked, of gambling products. You have affordability issues, you have vulnerability issues, you have addiction issues, and a lot of related other harms which can emanate from that, or relating to insolvency or using gambling for the wrong reasons. And we're all aware of that. So that's the first risk attached to a black market. And of course, black marketeers are not interested in protecting players. Really, they are not. They're there to make money, and they're there to increase their margins. And they know that if they do it in an unregulated way, they are paying no taxes, and they don't have to apply any of the measures that we responsibly adopt when introducing these products. In terms of the fiscal revenue, every country today seems to have an issue with the amount of revenue and fiscal revenue that it's deriving, from its residents or from anything else. It comes up in budgets, and it always seems to be very central to political discussions. You could even look at the USA these days, or you could look at Great Britain these days in terms of the narrative. And I don't see why this shouldn't fall within that. This is revenue which is going offshore illegally. It's not just, first of all, they're using illegal methods, and now they are taking it offshore, which is likely tax evasion as well. And so these and that money would be better spent in those countries on those residents. And what we do in a lot of countries is make sure that whatever profits we make, some of it is applied to corporate social responsibility programs. If you look at a lot of our programs through Africa, it's around upliftment. And I think these are good messages for a regulated markets and by extension can show what a black market is creating in terms of risk.
So you're working for Supergroup, big brand, tier one brands, Betway and Spin. And in certain markets, do you see kind of that encroachment of illegal gambling coming in the numbers? Have you seen any specific kind of market changes that you can say, look, that's
what we can see is
it's visibly there's a visible condition there.
What we can see, Ted, is because we've been in this industry for so long, we understand growth and trends and what numbers should be. Yeah. And when we look at that, we then have to say, well, why isn't like that? And we know, therefore, that the result is black market eating away at your market share. We also know, and we've done our own research as to how this black market product is being introduced. So we can see that. And they are not methods that we use or that we've mastered or that we're assisted with by governments or regulator. And that's social networking, AI and crypto. And you know, those are the technological advancements that I referred to earlier in this chat.
Yeah. And let me just ask you, what happens when a player goes off grid? I mean, can he come back or is he lost?
Well, I think that's a very good question. For the most part, once a player has gone off grid, as you call it, or into the black market, the chances of getting that player back are very, very, very low. And that's why emphasis and focus has to be on how you stop players going to those black markets as opposed to trying to get them back from the black market. Now, recently I've traveled and to a country and one of the methods they could use and could be effective is that depending on your governmental structure or how you rule your people or how much control you have, you can always say to your residents, look, we have a central system here. And if you go to the black market or you remain on the black market and we are aware of it, we're going to prosecute you criminally. I've seen that maybe taking it too far. These are things that you can do in a situation, Ted, where you've mentioned someone's already off the grid. You could be a lot softer and a lot cleverer in an approach trying to limit the amount of people who will go to the black market.
But don't you find this kind of fascinating from a legal perspective, an academic perspective? I mean, what are kind of the boundaries in protecting the customer from being exposed to an illegal threat? And as you mentioned that, you could fine the customer or the consumer, you could penalize them, but isn't there kind of like some civil rights in this? And also, what is the black market offering the customer that the legal market can't?
So I think that's a very good question. And I think what people can do and what they can't is a very good question in terms of civil rights and freedom to do whatever one wants to do. That goes back to an original point that people who go to the black market do so for different reasons. It's not always for nefarious reasons. It's sometimes, for example, it's simply that regulators have put too many obstacles in the way of just a good experience. They're asking for too much documentation. They're asking for too much proof of what you can afford or other information which a lot of people might consider personal and none of anyone's business. And that's a legitimate right or feeling that people have. And it's something that I think governments and regulators have to pay homage to in a certain way or believe is relevant in their approach as to how are they going to move towards the middle where you are creating less issues, frictions, obstacles for the customer. Yes, maybe at a little expense of social responsibility, but in order to win back a greater share of the black market, which is a greater evil. I mean, there's never going to be an absolute here. So I think in terms of civil rights, I think that's right. And I think regulators must focus more on how do they make these inquiries or requirements as least invasive as possible. When it comes to people who are using the black market or going to the black market for more nefarious reasons, well, I think that's a totally different debate.
But I'm saying this against the backdrop of, we've seen, especially in Europe, we've seen governments ask for centralized registries of, centralized player databases, universal deposit thresholds. And it seems that they're trying to kind of put a more surveilled control of gambling and who's gambling. And as you know, working in this industry, you have all sorts of customers. Now, one of the segments I want to kind of concentrate on is that if you are a high value customer or a VIP and you want to put down your bet or you want to gamble, doesn't the black market just offer you that and that control over what your legal entities can? And isn't this a question of also we have to think about the consumer individually, and that he is exposed individually to the threats of the black market?
Well, I mean, let's talk about that VIP question, which could be related to a question whether we believe there's a propensity for more high-value customers to go to the black market, right? They're associated questions. I think that when you're dealing with people of significant means or high net worths, they tend by personality to be people who don't necessarily wish for other people to know how much they earn, what they earn, or what they're doing. And I think that needs to be respected. And in a way, the black market does cater for that because it asks for less questions. Coming back to your point about whether players feel that they're under surveillance, for want of a better term, because of all of these checks and balances or databases that regulators are running, I think that's something which regulators should pay attention to. And I'm not sure that that's what they're doing, but if that's the perception of what they're doing, then I think they should try and change it themselves. And I think there's a lot of different messaging and campaigns that could assist in shutting down the black market. Coming to VIPs more specifically, yes, I think that they would be, a lot of high net worth individuals like to work in crypto, for example. Sometimes that's the reason that they want to go to the black market. And Ted, the question of crypto is very central here, because this is the method that most of the black market is using in terms of the financing of these activities and these transactions. And the problem with crypto, which is really central here, is that it's an unregulated product. And as long as it's an unregulated product from a financial perspective, it's going to be a problem. And directly in terms of how these products are regulated by the Gambling Commission, by the Maltese Gaming Authority, or any others, they are making it very difficult for crypto to be used because, and they can't be blamed for this, it's very difficult to see the provenance of these funds, and then you get in the way of money laundering and all of these questions. But something has to give, Ted, and crypto has to be legitimized some way, either as a regulated product or by these regulators, because this is the competition. And people are using crypto for a lot of different reasons, including high net worth individuals.
So, Anthony, we covered a lot of ground in this first part, but I want you to kind of take us out by just kind of telling our audiences kind of a simplified view to look at the black market and its threats.
The black market is prevalent because of, I believe, certain failures at the door of politicians, enforcement agencies, and regulators. This is because they have created an environment in which it's very difficult for customers to do what they want to do in a safe and exciting environment. Central to this issue is the use of crypto, and there needs to be focus on this by all of those parties that I've mentioned. Focus should also be put on the ecosystem where certain providers are enabling the black market, such as payment service providers and affiliates. I believe that if regulators, politicians, and those with power are serious about this, and this is the most important point I want to make, is that they need to speak to the operators. We speak to each other, but regulators aren't transparently and properly speaking to operators. And we are the ones, we believe, with deeper pockets and with the understanding of what's going on. And until they speak to us, I don't think they can say they're doing anything as effectively as they say they are.
Anthony, thanks for covering so much ground today. And to our listeners, please stay tuned for part 2 of this series. And thanks for sharing our milestone of 500 episodes.
Thank you for listening to today's iGaming Daily podcast, supported by Optimove, the #1 CRM marketing solution for the iGaming market. If you want to find out more about some of the subjects raised today, feel free to explore any of the sites in the SBC News network or check out the latest edition of the SBC Leaders magazine. Happy reading.